Jai. Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Pavan Janardan Maharaj ki Jai.
Bandeham Shri Guru Shiyata Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sa Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sagana Lalita Shivishikam Vitam Sja Om Jnana Timaranda Shagyanan Shanan Shalakya Shakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Gorva Bhishtam Supurakam Garaganara Sisha Sambhushitam Chintya Chintya Samasta Veda Nipanam Shirupa Patanugam Govindabhidam Ujjalam Bharatanum Bhaktyan Vidam Sundaram Mande Vishwagurun Shah Divyad Bhagavat Prem Navi Bija Pranam Devam Divyatanum Sushandavananam Balar Kaselan Shitam Chandrananda Puram Shadeka Varanam Vairagya Vidyam Buddhi Shri Siddhanta Nidhim Subhakti Lasitam Saraswatanam Baram Manditam Shubhadam Madhika Sharanam Nyashishvara Sridharam Mancha Kopatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavenebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Mahamananyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gauratavishe Namah. We're reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. Translation and commentary by Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. This is Madhya-lila, chapter 24, explanations of the Atmarama verse. And this is verse number 118. And here Mahaprabhu is describing the 9 Nava-yogendra, how they were realized persons and they became attracted to Krishna. Nava-yogishvara janma hoite sadaka jnani birishiva narana mukhe Krishna guna shuni. From their very birth, the 9 great mystic yogis, yogendras, were impersonal philosophers of the absolute truth. But because they heard about Lord Krishna's qualities from Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and the great sage Narada, they also became Krishna's devotees. Guna Krishna Hoyakore Krishnara Bhajan Ekadasha Skandetara Bhakti Vivaran. In the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a full description of the devotional service of the 9 yogendras, who rendered devotional service because they were attracted by the Lord's transcendental qualities. Aklesha Kamala Bhuva Pravishya Goshtim Kurvanta Shruti Shirasam Shrutim Shrutagya Utangam Yarupura Sangamaya Rangam Yogendra Pulaka Brito Navapi Avapu Aklesha Kamala Bhuva Pravishya Goshtim Kurvanta Shruti Shirasam Shrutim Shrutagya Utungam Yadu Pura Sangamaya Rangam Yogendra Pulaka Brito Navapi Avapu. The 9 yogendras entered Lord Brahma's association and heard from him the real meaning of the topmost Vedic literatures, the Upanishads. Although the yogendras were already conversant in Vedic knowledge, they became very jubilant in Krishna consciousness just by listening to Brahma. Thus they wanted to enter Dwarka, the abode of Lord Krishna. In this way, they finally achieved the place known as Rangakshetra. Mokha Kankshi Jnani Hoy Tina Prakar Mumuksho Jivan Mukta Praptya Swarupa Ar. Those who wish to merge into the impersonal Brahman are also divided into 3 categories: those desiring to be liberated, those already liberated, and those who have realized Brahman. Mumukshu Jagate Aneka Samsarijan Mukti Lage Bhakti Kore Krishnara Bhajan. There are many people within the material world who desire liberation, and for this purpose they render devotional service to Lord Krishna. Mamukabo Gorarupan Hitwa Bhutapatim Ata Narayana Kalashanta Bhajanti E Anasuyava. Those who wish to be relieved from the material clutches give up the worship of the various demigods who have fearful bodily features. Such peaceful devotees who are not envious of the demigods worship the different forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan. Se saber sadhu sange guna sfuraya Krishna bhajana karaya mumukha chadaya. If those who are attached to demigod worship fortunately associate with devotees, their dormant devotional service and appreciation of the Lord's qualities gradually awaken. In this way, they also engage in Krishna's devotional service and give up the desire for liberation and the desire to merge into the existence of impersonal Brahman. Ahom Mahatman Bahudosha Dushto Apiyakena Bhati Esha Bhavo Gunena Satsangama Kena Sakavahena Kritadya No Yena Krisha Mumukha. O great learned devotee, although there are many faults in this material world, there is one good opportunity, the association with devotees. Such association brings about great happiness. Due to this good quality, our strong desire to achieve liberation by merging into the Brahman effulgence has become weakened. Naradera Sange Shonakade Munigan Mumukha Chadiya Koila Krishnara Bhajan. By associating with the great sage Narada, Shonaka and other great sages gave up the desire for liberation and engaged in Krishna's devotional service. Krishnara Darshane Karo Krishnara Kripai Mumukha Chadiya Gune Bhaje Tarapai. Simply by meeting Krishna or receiving Krishna's special favor, one can give up the desire for liberation. Being attracted by the transcendental qualities of Krishna, one can engage in his service. Asmin Sukha Gana Murto Param Atmane Vrishni Patane Swarati Atmarama Taya Me Brita Gato Bhatta Chiram Kala. In this Dwarkadam, I am being attracted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, who is personified spiritual bliss. Simply by seeing him, I am feeling great happiness. I have wasted so much time trying to become self-realized through impersonal cultivation. This is a cause for lamentation. Jivan Mukta Neka Se Dui Beda Jani Bhakti Jivan Mukta Jnane Jivan Mukta Mani. There are many people who are liberated even in this lifetime. Some are liberated by discharging devotional service, and others are liberated through the philosophical speculative process. They're Jiva, Jnani Jivan Mukta, liberated by Gyan, the philosophical speculative process. Bhakti Jivan Mukta, Guna Krishna Hoya Krishna Bhaje, Shushka Gyane Jivan Mukta, Aparade Adomaje. Those who are liberated by devotional service become more and more attracted by the transcendental qualities of Krishna. Thus they engage in his service. Those who are liberated by the speculative process eventually fall down again due to offensive activity. Yenye Ravindaksha Vimukta Maninas Tvayasta Bhavad Avishuddha Buddhaya Aruye yakritrena param param data patantiado nadrita yushmarangraya. O lotus-eyed one, those who think they are liberated in this life but are without devotional service to you are of impure intelligence. Although they accept severe austerities and penances and rise to the spiritual position to impersonal Brahman realization, they fall down again because they neglect to worship your lotus feet. Yeah?
Maharaj, can you say something about how saying a speculative behavior can lead to, or a speculative kind of path or whatever can lead to offensive behavior?
Well, the main thing about this verse, what I just read, that verse is saying that the living entity is the eternal servant of the Lord. And by the speculative process of jnana, one can rise to the liberated position, but one never realizes one's own identity as an eternal servant of the Lord. So that's a very big omission in terms of one's development. And even though one may stay at that level for some, eventually one's latent material desires will bring one back to this material world. So I'd say that there may be different levels, but just ultimately not knowing or not engaging in the Lord's service, that in itself I would call wrong, or if you want to use the word offensive. How can that verse, on a personal level, I always thought of when I hear that verse of persons rising to some level of real impersonal realization. It always reminds me of this birds that you see. When I would see these birds flying very high and very effortlessly. Actually, those birds are called, they're called buzzards, and they look very graceful. They're so high in the sky, but they come back to the earth to eat a dead body. They're actually they're like of the nature of vultures, but they're much smaller. But they're still big and soar. So I think of this verse as persons attaining a high position, but then their kind of craven mentality brings them back to this earth, to some level of enjoyment. Now, someone can argue, well, how is that offensive? But I would say, if the living entity is the eternal servant of the Lord and attains liberation, but without engaging in the service of the Lord, I would say there's some latent offense there. That seems to me that how can you ignore the Lord's service? Okay. Brahma bhuta prashanatmana shochati na kankshati samasarveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim labate param. One who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes the supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed to every living entity. In that state he attains pure devotional service unto me. So those are really liberated and on the Brahmabhuta platform. Actually, from their level of realization, devotional service begins. So, obviously, there are living entities in this material world, and there are living entities that go towards the spiritual world. And we've heard some are attracted by light, and some are attracted by darkness. So if someone comes back to this side, to the material side, there must be some offense there. Must be some offense. Otherwise, why would not one take to devotional service? Somebody could say, well, maybe they never had the association of a devotee. But and maybe they didn't have the association of a devotee, but not everything begins in this lifetime. Advaita Viti Patikar Upasya Shivananda Simasana Labda Diksha Satena Kenapi Vayam Hatena Dashikrita Gopa Madhu Vitena. It's a verse by Bilva Mangal Thakur. Although I was worshipped by those on the path of monism and initiated into self-realization through the yoga system, I have nonetheless become forcibly turned into a maidservant by some cunning boy who is always joking with the gopis. Bhakti bole prapta swarup divya deho pai, Krishna guna Krishna haya bhaje Krishna pai. One who has attained his constitutional position by the strength of devotional service attains a transcendental body even in this lifetime. Being attracted by Lord Krishna's transcendental qualities, he finally engages in service at his lotus feet. So your question is good, but like when I read this, it says that verse was Bhakti Jivan Mukta Guna Krishna Haya Krishna Bhaje Shushka Gyane Jivan Mukta Aparade Aromaje. As those who are liberated by devotional service become more and more attracted by the transcendental qualities of Krishna, thus they engage in his service. Those who are liberated by the speculative process eventually fall down again due to offensive activity. So, my comment when I read that, it makes me think, oh, this is so. I mean, I read that and I think, well, that's what it's saying about those who are liberated by, so-called liberated in this life by dry speculative knowledge. So that's what happens to them. Some offense is there and they again come back to this world. And if I'm asked, how has that happened? Well, I mean, just saying, they were liberated and they came back to this world, and it says must have been some offense involved. They could not engage in the service of Krishna. They could not accept his lotus feet. So, the verse says it was due to some offense in their thinking. Or one could just say, in general, the position of being in personal level, that level itself is deficient. Nirodo shana shayanam atmana shaktibi muktir hitvan yatarupam swarupena vyavastiti. The living entities and other potencies merge into Mahavishnu as the Lord lies down and winds up, destroys the cosmic manifestation. Liberation means being situated in one's eternal original form after giving up the changeable, gross and subtle bodies. Krishna bahir mukha doshe maya hoite bai, Krishna mukha bhakti hoite maya mukta hoy. By opposing Krishna consciousness, one becomes conditioned and fearful due to the influence of Maya. By executing devotional service faithfully, one is liberated from Maya. Bhayam dutiya binivesha tadsha ishadape tasya viparyayo smriti tanmaya yato buddha abhajetam bhaktyai kayesham gurudeva tatma. When the living entity is attracted by the material energy, which is separated from Krishna, he is overpowered by fear. Because he is separated from the Supreme Personality of Godhead by the material energy, his conception of life is reversed. In other words, instead of being the eternal servant of Krishna, he becomes Krishna's competitor. This is called Viparya Smriti. To nullify this mistake, one who is actually learned and advanced worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead as his spiritual master, worshipful deity, and source of life. He thus worships the Lord by the process of unalloyed devotional service. So this verse is very nice. Bhayam dutiya binivesha tadshad ishadi apetasya viparyadyo smriti tanmaya yato buddha abhajetam bhaktyai kayesham gurudeva tatma. This is from the Srimad Bhagavatam, but it's actually explained here in the Chaitanya Charitamrita very nicely. When the living entity is attracted by the material energy, which is separate from Krishna, he is overpowered by fear. So even in the Bhagavad Gita, it says a little advancement in devotional service saves one from the greatest fear. So here it's confirming that when one is attracted by the material energy, which is separate from Krishna, one is overpowered by fear. That's the natural state of living separate from the Lord. Because he is separated from the Supreme Personality of God by the material energy, his conception of life is reversed. In other words, instead of being the eternal servant of Krishna, he becomes Krishna's competitor. This is called Viparya Smriti, which means a reversal of roles. A reversal of roles. Instead of realizing oneself to be the eternal servant of the Lord, one becomes Krishna's competitor, which says something about people in this material world. To nullify this mistake, one who is actually learned and advanced worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead as his spiritual master, worshipful deity, and source of life. He thus worships the Lord by the process of unalloyed devotional service. So Viparya Smriti actually refers to a role reversal. Role reversal. Instead of being the servant of the Lord, one becomes Krishna's competitor. And how does that happen? Well, what is it that pushes one to become Krishna's competitor? It's called false ego. That's the nature of false ego. Basically everyone on the level of material existence, they want everything to revolve around themselves. They're Krishna's competitor in the sense that the world is full of so many little persons, little Krishnas. Their position is Prakriti, as a servant, but instead they think they are Purush, the supreme enjoyer. That is the dictation of false ego. Daiviyesha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mam eva ye prapajante mayametam tarantite. This divine nature of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. When the material nature is Daivi Prakriti, empowered by the Lord, and one cannot overcome that divine potency by oneself, But if one is actually surrendered to the Lord, then Maya herself releases that person from her clutches. Bhakti vinu mukti nahi bhakti mukti hoy. One does not attain liberation without rendering devotional service. Liberation is attained only by devotional service. Shreya shritim bhaktim udashyate vivo. Klishyanti jay kevala bodha labdaye teshamaso kleshala evasishyate nanyadyata stula tushavagatinam. My Lord, devotional service unto you is the only auspicious path. If one gives it up simply for speculative knowledge or the understanding that these living beings are spirit souls and the material world is false, one undergoes a great deal of trouble. He only gains troublesome and inauspicious activities. His actions are like beating a husk that is already devoid of rice. His labor becomes fruitless. My dear Lord, devotional service unto you is the only auspicious path. If one gives it up simply for speculative knowledge or the understanding that these living beings are spirit souls and the material world is false, one undergoes a great deal of trouble. One only gains troublesome and inauspicious activities. One's actions are like beating a husk that is already devoid of rice. One's labor becomes fruitless. And then here, the repetition of what we heard before. Yenye ravindaksha vimukta maninas svayasta bhavad avishuddha buddhaya aruya krishrena parampadam tata patantiado nadrita yushmadangraya. O lotus-eyed one, those who think they are liberated in this life but are without devotional service to you are of impure intelligence. Although they accept severe austerities and penances and rise to the spiritual position, to impersonal Brahman realization, they fall down again because they neglect to worship your lotus feet. So that neglect to worship the lotus feet of the Lord, that in itself is an offense. Ya esham purusham sakshad atma prabhavam ishvaram Nabhajanti abhajananti stanad brashta patandiana. If one simply maintains an official position in the 4 varnas and ashramas, but does not worship the Supreme Lord Vishnu, one falls down from one's puffed up position into a hellish condition. Bhakti mukti paileha avasya Krishnare bhajai. When one is actually liberated by executing devotional service, one always engages in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Muktapi lilaya vigraham kritva bhagavantam bhajante. Muktapi lilaya vigraham kritva bhagavantam bhajante. This verse was also spoken previously, but there's a verse by Shankaracharya. This is a quotation from Shankaracharya's commentary on the Nrsimha Tapani Upanishad. So Shankaracharya is the leader of the impersonalists, and what he says here, Muktapi lilaya vigraham kritva bhagavantam bhajante. Even a liberated soul merged in the impersonal Brahman effulgence is attracted by the pastimes of Krishna. He thus installs a deity and renders the Lord service. From Shankaracharya's commentary on the Nrsimha Tapani Upanishad. Echai Atmarama Krishnare bhajai pritak pritak chak kare iha apira artakoi. These 6 kinds of Atmaramas engage in the loving service of Krishna. The varieties of service are indicated by adding cha, and they also bear the meaning of api, indeed. There are 6 kinds of Atmaramas. The neophyte student, sadhaka, one who is absorbed in Brahman realization, Brahmamoy, one who has already attained the Brahman position, Prapta Brahmaloy, one who desires to be liberated, Mumukshu, one who is liberated even in this life, Jivan Mukta, and one who is self-realized, Praptam Swarup. Atmaramas Japi Kore Krishna Ahaituki Bhakti Munaya Shanta Iti Krishna Manane Asakti. The 6 kinds of Atmaramas render devotional service to Krishna without ulterior motives. The words Munaya and Shanta indicate those who are very much attached to meditating upon Krishna. Nigranta Avidyahin Keho Vidihin Jahanje Juktase Arteradin. The word Nigranta means without ignorance and devoid of rules and regulations. Whichever meaning fits may be applied. Chashabde Korijari Itara Tayara. Chashabde Korijari Itara Tara Arta. Ara Ek Arta Akohe Parama Samarta. The use of the word cha in different places produces different meanings. Over and above them, there's another meaning that is very important. Atmaramascha Korebar Chai Panchatmarama Chai Chakare Lupta Hoy. Although the words Atmarama Cha could be repeated 6 times, because there are 6 different kinds of Atmaramas, although the words Atmaramas Cha would be repeated 6 times, simply by adding the word Cha, 5 Atmaramas are deleted. Because of grammatical formation, just by adding the word Cha, then you don't have to repeat the word Atmarama Cha. Ek Atmarama Shabda Avesharohe, Ek Atmarama Shabde Chai Janakohe. Therefore, there is no need to repeat the word Atmarama. One is sufficient, and that one word indicates 6 persons. Sarupanam Ek Shesha Ek Vibhakto Uktartanam Aprayoga Ramascha Rama Itivat. Of words having the same form and case termination, the last one is the only one retained. For example, the word Rama is used to stand for Ramascha, etc. So now we're talking about rules of Sanskrit grammar. Tabi Mahaprabhu is explaining this verse so many different ways, and he's showing how his explanations are consistent, because he's showing that Sanskrit as a language can be so many interpretations can be given. Now, normally, one of the complaints with the impersonal interpretation is that it is just that. The impersonalists are always interpreting things to get out some meaning which is not necessarily the initial intention, or is not the real intention of the author. For instance, Bhagavad Gita is that it's the song of God. Gita is song, and Bhagavad, it's between the Lord and his devotee, that conversation. And certainly by the 18th chapter we see that devotional service is strongly indicated. Sarvadharmam parijamamekam sharanam vraja ham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami mashucha. Just become my devotee and surrender to me. Don't worry, I will protect you from, I will give you protection. So the Lord is telling Arjuna, you just surrender yourself and engage in my devotional service. And every chapter is going in that direction. By the end of every chapter, the importance of devotional service is always being confirmed. So we can see that obviously Bhagavad Gita, by its very name, it's a conversation between the Lord and his devotee, and he's asking Arjuna, always, twice he says, always think of me, become my devotee, bow down before me. I mean, what could be more direct than that? And yet, you can, by utilization of Sanskrit grammar, to get so many different interpretations, and basically many of them just wrong interpretations of what is the finality of Bhagavad Gita. What is its purpose? What is going on? And yet you're getting so many abstruse, interpretations. Now here, Mahaprabhu is giving different explanations of the Atmarama verse. He's employing Sanskrit grammar rules. But basically, his intention is to show that this verse can be all-inclusive, not just, we could say that normally the Atmarama verse will mean that even those who are liberated souls are attracted by Krishna. That even a person who's beyond this material nature, or as it says in the Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Bhuta Prashanatmana Shochatina Kankshati Samasarveshu Bhuteshu Mad Bhaktim Labate Param. Even those who have attained the Brahma Bhuta platform of liberation, they are still attracted by Krishna, that Krishna's beyond even liberation. So that meaning one could get just by seeing the Atmarama verse. But in this case, what is happening is Sanatan Goswami said that previously, when you were speaking with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, you explained the Atmarama verse in so many different ways. And at that time, what prompted that is Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was defeated by Mahaprabhu, but Mahaprabhu said that the Srimad Bhagavatam is the natural commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, which are studied by obviously followers of Shankaracharya. His Sharirag Bhashya is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. So it is natural that Vedanta Sutra comes up, and people, especially the impersonalists, hold that as being explained by Shankaracharya, their leader, and that is so at one point when Mahaprabhu is discussing and he's defeating Shankaracharya Sharirag Bhashya, and he says that Srimad Bhagavatam is a natural commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Then Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, to kind of try and regain his position of false prestige, he tells Mahaprabhu, I like Srimad Bhagavatam also, and he refers to the Atmarama verse as, and then Sarvabhauma, he explains this Atmarama verse 9 different ways in an impersonal way, and then Mahaprabhu, I believe he defeats that by, actually Mahaprabhu explains the Atmarama verse to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, I believe it's 18 different ways without even touching upon the commentary of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So then later, after Mahaprabhu had explained to Sanatan Goswami Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana, which are there in all literature, as relationship with the Lord, process of serving the Lord, Bhakti Yoga, and the goal, Prema Prayojana. When he had explained everything to Sanatan Goswami, then Sanatan Goswami said to Mahaprabhu, I heard you explain the Atmarama verse in so many different ways to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and I would really like to hear that explanation. Then Mahaprabhu said, I don't remember what I said to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, but by your association, something that will come to my mind. And then Mahaprabhu is explaining the Atmarama verse what is it? He explains it something like, how many different ways he explains it? 60, what is it? Huh?
64?
64? Okay. He explains it 64 different ways. But he's doing so, and he's explaining all, just as before he spoke to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya 18 different ways. Now he's expanding it more than that. He's explaining also it could be expanded even more. But he's saying Mahaprabhu, and he's doing it by, also utilizing just the interpretation or the explanation of all the different words and all the different possible meanings of their combinations and the compound words, etc. But he's not doing that to distort the meaning of the Atmarama verse. He's doing that to show that everybody, without exception, everybody is ultimately attracted by Krishna. Ultimately, on all different levels. Animals, hunters, impersonalists, yogis, foolish people, fools, everything. Everyone ultimately will be attracted by Krishna. That's what Krishna's name means, that everyone will be attracted by him. They call Bhagavan refers to one who's complete 6 opulences. So that Bhagavan is referred, Narayan may be referred to as Bhagavan. But Jiva Goswami says that the meaning of Krishna being Bhagavan is one naturally wants to serve him. That everyone will be drawn by his service. A comment of Jiva Goswami. So, there's Mahaprabhu just expanding so many ways, all kinds of impersonalists. If you hear those who are desiring liberation, those who are on the platform of liberation, and those who are eternally liberated, all persons will be drawn to the service of Krishna. And he cites things like the example of Sukadeva Goswami, the example of the 4 Kumaras, the example of the Nava-yogendras, and then so many other examples. Yeah. And so this is Mahaprabhu. Someone can say, well, he's interpreting the verse. Yes, but he's interpreting the verse in a way that he's shown that the meaning is that universally all living entities are attracted to Krishna. And Jiva Swarupa Krishna Nityadas, it's the constitutional position of the Jiva that he's the eternal servant of Krishna. So why he will not be attracted by the service of Krishna? But obviously, when one's covered by the material energy, as it was explained in the verse, Mayam Dutiya Vinipeshatadja, that there's a role reversal going on in the material world, that those who are the eternal servants of Krishna, by false ego, instead of recognizing themselves as servants, they see themselves as Krishna's competitor. And there is a demon. What is that demon's name? One demon, he actually more or less pasted 2 more arms on himself, so he'd have 4 arms, and he told Krishna to surrender to him, that he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and presenting himself with 4 arms, but 2 of them are fake. There's a demoniac mentality that I'm the Supreme Lord, you should serve me. Cannot even recognize Krishna, and he's telling him, I'm the Supreme Lord. You should serve me. And that way may think that person is really ill. Although when we see the actions of persons nowadays, we begin to understand that this mentality is not as unknown as one would think, that people are actually very perverse in this material world. They do things by all kinds of strange distortions of their consciousness. So what's being explained here by Mahaprabhu is how ultimately all living entities will become attracted by Krishna. Now, it may not happen in one lifetime, obviously, but the point is that this is Mahaprabhu's explanation of the Atmarama verse, and it is. And Sanatan goes, when Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya heard that, he came to the conclusion is that this person who I'm talking to is actually the Supreme Lord. He's appearing as a devotee, but he's actually the Lord himself. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya came to that conclusion. Now, Sanatan Goswami already knows that Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Lord, but the explanation, and Mahaprabhu gives him this amazing explanation of the Atmarama verse, and explains in such a way that, of course, we're not versed in literature or understanding of languages like Sanatan Goswami. Sanatan Goswami is a minister and said he even spoke Persian and all these other languages, but we are not qualified in so many ways. So many meanings that are explained by Mahaprabhu to Sanatan Goswami. So many of those meanings, their intricacy will escape us. We don't know. We don't know enough to really be, or we're not developed enough to be able to really understand what Mahaprabhu is doing, what he's saying, how he's presenting this on so many levels and very deep scholastically, everything. We can't appreciate that. Therefore, I sometimes find it very, I forget how many years Prabhupada said it takes so many years to be able to become versed in Sanskrit language, and yet we find devotees that they study Sanskrit for a few years, and then they begin to think they're know-it-alls. I mean, they become know-it-alls. And I've seen that in cases. People develop some gyan, and their gyan just inflates their ego so much. If one, as we were discussing, if one neglects the service of Krishna's lotus feet, it is due to an offensive mentality. It's like the conversation between Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and Gopinathacharya. Sarvabhauma Gopinathacharya explains to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya that Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Lord himself, and says, only those who have received the mercy of the Lord are able to perceive him. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya objects, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya says, well, what's the evidence that you've received the mercy of the Lord and I haven't? And Gopinathacharya says, because even though Mahaprabhu was lying for so many hours in your house in deep trance and has exhibited all the symptoms beyond even of a Mahabhagavata, and he's there, and he says you couldn't recognize him, and I can recognize him. So then Gopinathacharya says, he answers, what's the evidence that you've received the mercy of the Lord and I haven't? Gopinathacharya says, his basic point is, because I can recognize him and you can't. That's his basic argument. It seems someone could say, well, that's circular, but he's saying, only one who's received the mercy of the Lord can recognize him. And Gopinathacharya then says, what's the proof that you've received the mercy of the Lord and I haven't? And then Gopinathacharya says, it's practically what he says is axiomatic. He says that I've just explained that only one who can recognize, only one who has received the mercy of the Lord can recognize him. And then what's the evidence you've received the mercy of the Lord? Because I can recognize him. Now somebody could argue, well, that doesn't really prove anything, because it doesn't prove that Mahaprabhu is the Lord by that reasoning. I can recognize him, you can't. Someone could say that. Someone can say that about another living person, that I can recognize is the Lord and you can't. But in this case, Gopinathacharya is what he's speaking, we could say is like axiomatic, because Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Lord and he can recognize him. It's not a question of recognizing somebody who's not the Lord. I mean, Mahaprabhu gives evidence that he's Supreme Lord. He gives the evidence. The evidence was later brought Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to the realization that who he was speaking with and who he was thinking as a child is the Supreme Lord himself. That this kind of explanation would be not possible by a living entity. So naturally, if Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is so exalted, recognizes this kind of explanation would not be possible by a living entity, then is it any wonder that someone like ourselves, who is not versed in anything practically, including devotion, that we will not understand what is. It's not strange that we won't understand all the facets and all the literary explanations and so many other kinds of references that Mahaprabhu is presenting. He's presenting points. And then I would say then, although maybe this statement is not fair, but I will say it anyway, that Srila Prabhupada presented the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and that Chaitanya Charitamrita has been edited edited basically for clarity, because sometimes Srila Prabhupada, I mean, anyone will have editors. Srila Prabhupada had editors, but it is also possible that some of the misunderstandings that what may arise in our reading is also due to the way things are edited. It's not impossible. It's not impossible. Anyway, I'll continue. Although the words Atmarama's cha would be repeated 6 times only by adding the word cha, 5 Atmaramas are deleted. Ek Atmarama Shabda Avesharo He, Ek Atmarama Shabde Chai Janako He. Therefore, there is no need to repeat the word Atmarama. One is sufficient, and that one indicates 6 persons. Sarupanam Ekasesha Eka Vibhakto Uktartanam Aprayoga Ramascha 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 Rama Itivat. Of words having the same form and case termination. The last one is the only one retained. For example, the word Rama is used to stand for Ramascha, 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 etc. This is a quotation from Painini's Sutras. He is explaining how within the one use of the word Ramascha, how when it says Ramascha, it refers to all the different persons who would be called Rama. Ramas would be referred to as Ramascha. Now, Tabi Jai Chak Kara Se Samuchai Koi Atmaramascha Munayascha Krishnare Bhajai. By the aggregate use of the word cha, it is indicated that all the Atmaramas and saints serve and worship Krishna. Nigranta apira eapi sambhavane eta shata arta pratame korilun vyakyane. Api added to the word nigranta is used for exposition. Thus I have tried to clarify 7 meanings of the Atmarama verse. Let's see. Actually, Nilamani. Well, anyway, it's not explained 64 different ways. As far as I always remember, this Atmarama verse is explained 61 different ways. I've thus explained 60 different meanings, and all of these aim at the service of Lord Krishna. After giving so many examples, that is the only meaning. Now, due to your association, another meaning has awakened. It is due to your devotional service that these waves of meaning are arising. And then he quotes the verse, Aham vedmi shuko veti vyaso veti na veti va bhaktya bhagavatam grayam na budya nacha tikaya. Lord Shiva said, I may know, Shukadeva Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, may know, and Vyasadeva may know or may not know the Srimad Bhagavatam and the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. The spotless Purana can be learned only through devotional service, not by mental intelligence, speculative methods, or imaginary commentaries. Let's just see back here to here. Yeah, here the very title is the 61 explanations of the Atmarama verse. So it's not, maybe we misheard. Did someone say 64? I thought it was.
That's what I heard.
No, I'm sure he must have said 61. Just in here. What's that? Oh, Nilamani already left, right?
I think so.
Okay. Okay. It's getting late, huh? I mean, he just got here. I mean, we start at 7.
Oh. About 8.
I said 8, but I started at 7. So, okay, I'll read a few more pages. Antarjami upasaka Atmarama koi, say Atmarama jogir dui beta hoy. The yogi who worships the supersoul within himself is also called Atmarama. There are two types of Atmarama yogis. So what's happening here is Mahaprabhu is explaining a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam called Atmarama verse. He's explaining it 61 different ways of explaining the verse. So this chapter is Mahaprabhu is like really taking the verse apart and explaining all the different possible meanings. So it's pretty deep in terms of presentation and showing how a Sanskrit verse can be applied to all kinds of living entities, or whether plants, animals, humans, how everyone's attracted to the service of Krishna, and he's explaining it through how the Atmarama verse can be applied to yogis and impersonalists and everything. So the chapter is actually pretty involved, but it's an explanation because the question arose by Sanatan Goswami that I heard you explain the Atmarama verse to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So, and I'd like to hear from you your explanation of the verse. But the explanation really, would go way beyond a doctorate thesis. It's just going so much into the explanation of the verse. So we're in the middle of that, and naturally it's explaining how all kinds of yogis and impersonalists and even plants and animals, hunters, all kinds, foolish people, fools, everyone's all attracted to the service of Krishna. So it's it's an explanation that's being directed to Sanatan Goswami, but I find the explanation it's just like all the examples that Mahaprabhu gives. I just find it very interesting, but admittedly, I'm not a scholar of Sanskrit, and I don't, but still I'm able to appreciate Mahaprabhu's explanation. It's not really just meant for people who are Sanskrit scholars. It's just meant for anyone who has some interest. How is it Krishna consciousness? What are we doing? What's happening here? Why? Just like, I'll even find it amazing that, just in our ashram, you'll see so many persons with so many different kinds of consciousness and so many different conceptions and so many considerations. They are drawn to devotional service for one reason or another. And I don't know what you could say. It's like, say you have a diamond or a jewel. You can see that diamond's been cut with so many different facets, so many different planes. That's what makes it sparkle and everything special. So there's so many different facets to Krishna consciousness, and we find so many diverse, different types of people are attracted to Krishna consciousness. You wouldn't say that they're all of one mentality. They're of one mentality in the sense that they're all trying to serve Krishna, but the kinds of people you would find, even persons who, by normal standards, wouldn't have anything to do with each other, still they're all attracted to Krishna consciousness. One could say it's through the attraction for the spiritual master, like Srila Govinda Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj. By so many great spiritual masters, we're attracted to their vision of reality, how they see life, how they explain the spiritual nature of everyone. I mean, it's so all-inclusive. I'm sure there's so many, there's so many different mentalities that if you leave yourself in a room with different persons for very long, you'll get into a violent argument with them. That's how diverse they are. And I don't know. But still, somehow or other, we're all able to live under the same roof. Kind of amazing in it. So many different persons are attracted to Krishna consciousness. So I'll just finish this page here. Antarjami upashaka Atmarama koi, say Atmarama yogir dui beda hoy. Mahaprabhu is speaking. The yogi who worships the supersoul within himself is also called Atmarama. There are two types of Atmarama yogis. Sagarba nigarba hoy dui bed, 18 bede chai vibed. The two types of Atmarama yogis are called Sagarba and Nirgarba. Each of these is divided into 3. Therefore, there are 6 types of worshippers of the Supersoul. Now, these are yogis. The word Sagarba yogi refers to a yogi who worships the Supersoul in the Vishnu form. In other words, the Lord with form. That's one kind of yogi. The Nigarba yogi worships the Supersoul without form. The Sagarba and Nigarba yogis, so there's 2 kinds. Those yogis, we're not yogis, but those yogis who worship the Supersoul with form, and those yogis who worship the Supersoul without form. Then, the Sagarba and Nigarba, those are the 2 kinds of yogis, are further categorized. Sugarba Yoga Rurukshu, Nirgarba Yoga Rurukshu, Sagarba Yoga Ruda, Nigarba Yoga Ruda, Sagarba Prapta Siddhi, and Nigarba Prapta Siddhi. So, Kechir Sva Dehanta Hridaya Vakashe Pradesha Matram Purusham Vasantam Chaturbhujam Kanja Ratanga Sanka Gadadaram Dharanaya Smaranti. Some yogis think of the Lord within their hearts as measuring about 6 inches. The Lord has 4 hands in which he holds a conch shell, club, disc, and lotus flower. Those who worship this form of Vishnu within the heart are called Sugarba yogis. Evam haro bhagavati pratilabdha bhavo bhaktya dravad dridaya udpulaka pramodat udkanja bashpa kalayamahur ardyamanas tachabichitam badisham Shanakar Vyungte. When one is in, so there are persons, the yogis, it is said they're worshiping the form of Vishnu which resides in the heart. And then there are those who worship the Lord without having any form. They're all different kinds of yogis. When one is in ecstatic love with the Supreme Personality of God, and one's heart is melted by bhakti yoga and one feels transcendental bliss. There are bodily symptoms manifest, and due to eagerness there are tears in the eyes. Thus one is subjected to spiritual bliss. When the heart is overly afflicted, the meditative mind, like a fishing hook, is gradually separated from the object of meditation. Thus one is subjected to spiritual bliss. When the heart is overly afflicted, the meditative mind, like a fishing hook, is gradually separated from the object of meditation. Chitta badisham, with the heart like a fishing hook, Shanakai gradually Vyungte separates from. I mean, obviously there's something in these explanations that is. So, Yoga Ruruksha, Yoga Rurukshu, Yoga Ruda, Praptas Siddhiyar, 18 Bede Hoy, Chai Prakar. By these 3 divisions of advancement In yoga, Yoga Ruksha, Yoga Ruda, and Prapta Siddhi, there are 6 kinds of mystic yogis. So, I mean, we've been reading for over an hour or so. But you can see by the verses given and the explanations that this is being explained on a different level. Somebody asked me to explain like this verse, the ending of here. When the heart is overly afflicted, the meditative mind, like a fishing hook, is gradually separated from the object of meditation. I mean, I'm not going to explain that. Yeah.
I can feel it.
Yeah. But it, there is some understanding that yogi has been caught and now the hook is taken out. That explains something of what's happening on some level of realization. Okay. Hariharaya Nama Krishna Jadavaya Nama Hariharaya Nama Krishna Jadavaya Nama Jadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Nama Jadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Nama Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Giridhari Gopinatha Marana Mohan Giridhari Gopinatha Marana Mohan Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Garadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Garadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasha Raghunath Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasha Raghunath H.I. Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan H.I. Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan Jaoite Vignana Shabishta Puran Jaoite Vignana Shabishta Puran H.I. Gosai Jarmui Taradas H.I. Gosai Jarmui Taradas Tasabar Pada Renu Mora Panchagras Tasabar Pada Renu Mora Panchagras Tader Charana Sevi Bhakta Sanibas Tader Charana Sevi Bhakta Sanibas Janame Janame More Abilas Janame Janame More Abilas H.I. Gosai Jabe Braje Koilabas H.I. Gosai Jabe Braje Koilabas Radha Krishna Nitya Lila Korila Prakash Radha Krishna Nitya Lila Korila Prakash Anande Bolo Hari Bhaja Vrindavan Anande Bolo Hari Bhaja Vrindavan Shri Guru Vaishnava Pade Majai Aman Shri Guru Vaishnava Pade Majai Aman Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koryas Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koryas Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamadas Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamadas Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Nitai Gora Haribol, 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 Nitai Gora Haribol, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Haribo. Jai Saparikara Shishi Guru Guranga Gandharvika Giridhari Ju Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Nirmohacharya Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Rakak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Bhagavan Srila Bhakti Sunanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Gaur Kishordas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Rupanuga Guru Bharga Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath. Shri Jiva Gopal Bhatta Dasha Raghunath. Shad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Premsiko Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopi Govardhan Shyam Kuna Radha Kunda Kalindi Avamuna Ju Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. All the assembled devotees Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo.
Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Pavan Janardan Maharaj Ki Jai.
Okay, you can.